My sister pushed me out of a helicopter and I walked into my funeral like a ghost they thought they buried. My name is Celine. I remember the moment her hand left my shoulder. The whirring of the rotor blades, the smell of her perfume mixed with jet fuel. Her voice, low and deliberate. You've always been in the way. Behind her, my husband Rowan crossed his arms and watched me fall, like it was the final step in a business transaction. They wanted me gone, for $5 million and the company I built from nothing. They thought I'd die. They planned everything. The insurance claim was filed before my body was even cold in their imaginations. They held hands at my funeral and wept crocodile tears for the cameras. But I didn't die. I clawed my way through pain, frost, and betrayal, surviving on nothing but spite and the memory of their lies. And then, 3 months later, dressed in black, I opened the doors of the funeral home they rented with my blood money and smiled. "Sorry I'm late," I said. "Had to climb out of a grave you two dug for me." The room went silent. And that's when everything began to unravel. I used to think Milus was the only person in the world who truly saw me. We weren't just sisters. We were survivors. Raised in a broken house that echoed more with slammed doors than lullabies, we clung to each other like lifelines. I was the older one by 2 years, and even at 8 years old I knew it was my job to protect her. Our father vanished one day after an argument so loud the neighbors called the cops. Our mother stayed, but barely. She was more ghost than guardian, drifting through days with a cigarette in one hand and bitterness in the other. So I stepped in. I packed Milus's lunches. I braided her hair for school. I stood between her and the world because no one else would. At night, when thunder rattled the windows, Milus would slip into my bed and wrap her small fingers around mine. "Don't leave me," she whispered, more times than I could count. And every time, I answered, "Never." Because I meant it. We had so little, but we made it feel like more. Milus loved to draw, and I saved up what little I had from babysitting gigs to buy her sketchbooks. In return, she covered my school binders in elaborate doodles, her way of saying thank you. We created our language of loyalty, shared granola bars, handwritten birthday cards, long walks down cracked sidewalks pretending they were runways. When I graduated from high school, I skipped college to work. I couldn't afford both tuition and groceries, and Milus still needed me. I picked up a job cleaning floors at a local design firm, and for the first time, I saw what building something from nothing looked like. It sparked something. I spent every spare moment learning design software tutorials, business blogs, watching how clients walked through spaces and lit up when they felt seen. By 22, I'd opened my first studio with money scraped from side hustles and a second-hand laptop. It was tiny. Just me and a hope too stubborn to quit. Milus painted a mural on the front window, soft golds and blues swirling around our name, a promise in brushstrokes. "This is ours," she said. "I believe in you." Then came Rowan. He walked into that cramped studio with a pitch deck in one hand and a half-finished latte in the other, looking for design consultation for his startup. He had a quick wit and a quiet intensity, and I was hooked before I knew I'd fallen. He admired the mural. He asked about our story. He took me seriously in a way few men did back then. He didn't just charm me, he fit into our world. He brought Milus pastries from her favorite bakery, remembered her birthday, and praised her organizational skills when we eventually brought her on as operations lead. The three of us became a unit, late-night brainstorms, spontaneous dance breaks, and a shared dream that felt unstoppable. The company grew faster than I could have imagined. From 1 room to 3 offices, from 5 clients to 50. Rowan became my husband, standing beside me in a courtyard strung with fairy lights, whispering vows I still remember. Milus cried the whole night. "You saved us," she said, squeezing both our hands. "You gave us a real life." I thought we were unbreakable. We built everything together. I handled design and creative direction, Rowan managed finance, Milus kept the operations tight. Every decision we made as a team. I told investors in interviews, "We're not just partners, we're family." And I believed it. I shared passwords, equity, and trust. When Milus said she wanted more responsibility, I handed her the keys to a new location. When Rowan wanted to restructure financial oversight, I didn't flinch. I trusted them with my life. Literally, as it turns out. Because back then, I had no reason to doubt. No cracks I could see, just my sister and my husband, the 2 people I loved most in this world, standing beside me. I never realized they were already behind me, ready to push. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about betrayal. It sneaks in like fog, quiet and soft, until you're choking on it without realizing it's filled the room. The first sign was Rowan's smile. It used to be really warm in a way that settled my nerves, but slowly it changed. He began smiling with just his mouth, eyes distant, like he wasn't fully present. It was the same smile he gave clients before he pitched them something they didn't need. Polished, practiced, hollow. Then came the meetings I wasn't invited to. At first it was just a scheduling thing. A call was moved earlier than expected, a chat that didn't seem important. But then I started walking into decisions that had already been made. Layouts changed, budgets reassigned, clients reassigned. I'd ask Milas why no one looped me in, and she'd just blink and say, "I thought Rowan told you." He never did. Milas had always been close, but now she was omnipresent. She started dressing more like me, sharp suits, minimal gold jewelry. She copied my signature closing line in emails. She answered questions directed at me in meetings. "Celine would agree," she'd say without looking at me. She stopped calling me sis. At home, Rowan became quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was like he had turned down the volume on who we used to be. He no longer asked how my day went, no longer made the coffee he once knew I needed to function. He took more work trips without details. He changed his phone password. I asked if he was okay. He nodded. Just busy. Always busy. One night, I heard them laughing. Rowan and Milas, together in the kitchen. My name wasn't spoken, but I felt it in the air, like they just deleted me from a private joke. I walked in, and their conversation stopped so suddenly, it echoed. They smiled at me, too wide, too fake. I stopped sleeping through the night. There was always something small, my ideas dismissed in favor of data-driven direction, which always aligned with what Rowan or Milas wanted. I'd spend days crafting pitches only for them to be passed over with a shrug. "It's not quite the image we're going for," Rowan would say. The irony? The image was mine. I'd built the brand they now wielded like a sword against me. Milas began calling herself a co-founder during press interviews. She started using we instead of Celine. Rowan told me to take more time for myself, to rest, to let the team lead. I smiled and nodded. What else could I do? Even my assistant changed her tone. One day she looked up from her desk and asked if I needed directions to a meeting in my own building. I laughed it off. But inside, something started to crack. I checked the company's financial portal one evening and found my access restricted. "Security update," Milas explained. "You'll be back on by tomorrow." I wasn't. A week passed. Then 2. Then came Aspen. It was Rowan's idea. "We need time," he said. "Just us. To reset." Milas planned the itinerary. I should have known. But I wanted so badly to believe that I wasn't being pushed out, that the people I loved weren't slowly carving me out of the life I had built. I blamed stress. I blamed the pace of growth. I blamed myself. But I never blamed them. Not until the moment I saw Rowan stand still, arms folded, as Milas leaned close and whispered in my ear, "You've always been in the way." That was the final sign. But the truth? The betrayal had started long before the fall. The cold in Aspen that morning didn't feel like weather. It felt like a warning. I stood near the helicopter watching the snowflakes dissolve against my coat, trying to convince myself this was a fresh start, a celebration of everything we'd built, a chance to reconnect with Rowan. His hands were steady as he fastened the harness around my waist. His eyes didn't meet mine. "Happy anniversary," he said, and kissed my cheek. The gesture was mechanical. My stomach twisted, but I smiled anyway. I wanted to believe. Milas was there too, dressed like a magazine ad. Perfect lipstick, perfect smile, too perfect. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "You deserve this day, Celine." Her eyes darted away too fast. Something in me hesitated. Something else chose to ignore it. The helicopter blades started spinning, cutting the air into pieces. I climbed in and sat by the window, watching Rowan and Milas slide in beside me, knees brushing. They didn't look at me. The pilot gave a thumbs up. The world lifted away beneath us. The view was breathtaking. Mountains cloaked in snow, rivers winding like silver thread. I tried to let that beauty fill the hollow places inside me. Maybe we really were going to start over. Maybe I was wrong. Roland's hand brushed mine on the seat. For a second, I felt hope. Then Milas raised her phone. "Smile for the family, Celine," she said, her tone too bright, camera angled toward me. She leaned in closer than necessary, her hair brushing my cheek. I forced a smile. Rowan didn't even try. His face was unreadable. Milas's phone dropped to her side. Her mouth was by my ear. Her breath was warm, her voice like ice. "You've always been in the way." And then she shoved. It didn't feel real, not at first, just movement. Cold air, silence that roared. I saw Rowan sitting back, arms crossed, watching me fall. He didn't flinch, didn't reach, didn't move. The world spun, white and blue and branches rushing up. I reached, screamed, and prayed. My fingers caught a thick limb. The pain exploded, shoulder-wrenching, something in my leg twisting wrong. I screamed again. The branch held. I didn't fall farther. Everything hurt. I don't remember how long I hung there. Long enough for the helicopter to vanish into a dot in the sky. Long enough to know they weren't coming back. Long enough to understand they never planned to. Blood dripped from my temple. My jeans were soaked through with snow. My leg throbbed. My shoulder was useless. I dragged myself toward the tree trunk, teeth clenched against a scream in my throat. I didn't cry. There was no room for tears. Not today. I moved because lying there meant dying. It took hours, maybe minutes. Pain turned time into fog. I stumbled, crawled, and dragged myself toward a cabin that appeared like a mirage in the snow. I hammered on the door with the last of my strength. It creaked open. No one answered. Inside smelled like old smoke and pine. There was a wood stove, a pile of blankets, and a first aid kit. I wrapped my leg, made a sling. Every breath was a war, every movement screamed. But I was alive. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind spun with images. Milas laughing, Rowan watching, the cold calculation in their eyes. Then the radio crackled. Female, presumed dead, body unrecovered. My name, my voice caught in my throat. I was erased, vanished. From the world. My phone, miraculously dry inside my coat, buzzed with a banking alert. Pending transaction. The insurance claim. $5 million. I laughed. It came out broken. I whispered to the empty room, "They think I'm dead." Then, louder, clearer, "Let them think that." I found an old ranger's coat, heavy boots, and started to plan. But I haven't left yet. I needed strength, evidence, a plan. I found canned food, water, and old maps. I slept in shifts, watched the news. I saw Rowan on TV, his voice choked with grief. Milas clung to his arm. They stood beneath my portrait, mourning. They had already filed paperwork. I took over the company. They were rewriting my life. And then came the kicker. Rumors about my mental health, claims I'd been unstable, paranoid, that I'd run away, maybe taken my own life. They weren't just stealing my money, they were stealing my story. I thought about going to the police, but I knew how it would look. I had no proof. My body hadn't been found. My accounts were frozen, and they were building a case that I was delusional. It was too hype. I needed help, someone who knew me, believed me. I called Vera. Her voice shook when she heard mine. "Celine? Jesus. They said..." "I know what they said. I need help. Quiet. Help." She didn't hesitate. "I'm coming." And just like that, I had a lifeline. I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal ran, but I knew I was no longer just a victim. I was the ghost in their machine, and I was coming back. The snow never stopped. Some days it was a soft whisper, dusting the trees like powdered sugar. Other days, it slammed against the cabin like fists, howling through the cracks in the walls, echoing the storm inside my chest. I didn't know how long I had been there. Time had unraveled. Morning bled into evening without ceremony. I kept track by scratching lines into the wood beside the stove. 23 lines, then I stopped. What did it matter? My leg throbbed constantly. The makeshift splint held, but the swelling never went down completely. My shoulder clicked every time I shifted, sending sharp pain down my spine. Moving hurt, breathing hurt, thinking hurt most of all. Sometimes I stared at the fire so long my vision blurred. I imagined Rowan and Milas dancing in my office, laughing over the paperwork, dividing my life like scavengers. Other times, I pictured the fall, again and again, my body spinning through air, the betrayal sharp as wind. I barely ate. Canned beans, stale crackers. I drank melted snow and counted the hours between painkillers. My phone battery died on the 6th day. Vera had promised she was coming. I didn't know if she still would. I wasn't sure I cared anymore. The cabin had no mirrors, but I caught glimpses of myself in the window's reflection. hollow-eyed, bruised, wild-hailed. I didn't recognize that woman. She looked like someone who had already died, but hadn't laid down yet. I started talking to shadows, to the creaking floorboards, to the wind. Sometimes I swore I heard Milas's voice outside, whispering through the trees. I screamed at her once, slammed the door, and sobbed so hard I vomited. One night, I sat on the floor beside the stove, knees to my chest, and let the darkness take over. Maybe it would be easier to disappear. Let them have the money. Let them spin their story. Let them believe I broke. I was broken. But somewhere in the silence, I remembered Milas's voice. You've always been in the way. The venom in it. The finality. And I thought, no, I haven't. I was the one who braided her hair when she cried. I was the one who built the company from scratch. I was the one who trusted, who gave, who believed. And they tried to erase me because I was inconvenient. Because I made them look small next to everything I'd built. That wasn't a failure. That wasn't weakness. That was a threat. And maybe I had been naive. Maybe I had been too soft. But I wasn't stupid. And I wasn't gone. Not yet. I found the emergency crank radio in the cabinet and tried again. Static. Then a voice. A weather report. A ranger's notice. Then nothing. Still, I stayed alert. I wrapped my leg tighter, forced myself to eat more. When the firewood ran low, I hobbled out with a stick for balance and dragged what I could from behind the cabin. The pain nearly blacked me out, but I did it. Every day I did one more thing. Recharged the solar lantern, organized the maps, practiced walking again. I reread the last texts Vera had sent me. I journaled what I remembered from the betrayal, the fall, the company's passwords, and the contacts I could still trust. I was surviving, but barely. And on the 15th day, just before dusk, I heard it. Footsteps, crunching through snow. My heart stopped. I grabbed the only weapon I had, an old cast-iron pan, and braced myself. The knock was soft, then a voice. "Selene, it's me. It's Vera." I dropped the pan. She looked like hope, red cheeks, wide eyes, arms full of supplies. She pulled me into a hug and held me while I sobbed for the first time since the fall. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "They think they won," I said through tears. She pulled back, fierce. "Then let's prove them wrong." We sat by the stove, Vera rubbing warmth into my frozen fingers, her voice anchoring me to the present. She made tea from herbs she brought. She handed me a phone with a fresh battery pack. I stared at the screen like it was a relic from another life. "Everyone thinks you're dead," she said. Rowan gave a eulogy that made me sick. I shook my head. I watched it. I watched them hold hands in front of my portrait like they hadn't just thrown me out of the sky. Vera leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We'll build this case. We'll gather proof. You don't have to hide anymore." "I do," I whispered. "Just a little longer. If they know I'm alive now, they'll spin it again. Say I faked it for sympathy. They need to be caught off guard." She nodded. "Then we catch them off guard. But you're not doing this alone." And for the first time in weeks, I believed that. I was still broken, but now I wasn't buried. I was rising. And this time, I'd bring fire. The first thing Vera did was cut my hair. It had grown wild in the cabin, snarled, brittle, stained with weeks of ash and snow. She trimmed it short, framing my face with clean edges. "New look," she said, "for a woman who came back from the dead." We both laughed, but it broke something in me open. That night, I cried. Not out of pain, but release. Recovery wasn't a straight line. Some mornings I woke up choking on panic, heart pounding like I was still falling from the sky. The other day I moved with purpose, stretching, training my leg to bend again, testing my balance. I stopped fearing mirrors. I started wearing my name like armor again. It's Lane. While my body healed, my mind sharpened. Vera turned her tiny mountain home into a war room. Walls lined with timelines, screenshots, financial reports, and lists of everyone involved in the cover-up. We mapped every lie Rowan and Milas had told. We traced their sudden wealth, their fabricated interviews. The board voted that they had manipulated forged emails. But what we needed wasn't suspicion. We needed proof. That's when Aaron stepped in. He was a ghost from Milas's past, a tech contractor she had once seduced and discarded, leaving him blacklisted and nearly bankrupt. When Vera reached out to him, she expected reluctance. Instead, he said, "Tell Selene I've been waiting for this day." Aaron had kept everything. Photos, voice memos, even a copy of Milas's confidential email archive. which she had stupidly backed up to a shared cloud folder they used during their brief affair. Among the thousands of files we found gold: voice messages where Milas mocked my fragile mind, emails discussing insurance policies, and one damning video she sent Rowan, laughing, "Just one push and we own it all." I watched that clip a dozen times. It made my skin crawl, but I needed to remember the face of betrayal. Aaron also helped us scrub my digital identity clean: new documents, alternate bank accounts, a secure VPN trail. I became Elena Marks on paper, an environmental photographer who had taken a break from civilization. Mornings began with routines: walks down hidden trails, physical therapy videos streamed from Vera's old tablet, strength bands and makeshift weights from jugs of water. I cursed through every squat, pushed past every ache. My muscles remembered eventually. At night, I meditated, not to find peace, but focus. Vera taught me breathwork, the same she'd used during her own dark chapter after losing her mother. "You don't have to forgive," she told me once, "but you do have to choose who you become next." I chose fire. Meanwhile, Aaron proved to be more than a source. He became an architect of the comeback. With his background in cybersecurity, he reconstructed every move Milas and Rowan had made since my death. He traced shell companies, redirected transactions, and uncovered secret meetings with offshore lawyers. "What they've done," he said one night, eyes locked on a line of code, "is bigger than just killing you. They've defrauded the federal government." That's when we realized, if we timed it right, this wouldn't just be revenge, it would be justice. Aaron also helped me craft my next identity, not a return to the old Celine, but a smarter, quieter version. I began leaking anonymous reports about the company's shady dealings to watchdog blogs, baiting journalists to dig deeper. I opened a shell LLC to acquire minor shares in my own company under a different name. And through it all, we watched Milas and Rowan grow bolder: lavish parties, private jets, TV interviews. They thought the world adored them. Soon they'd see what it adored was a lie. But there was one final step before I could return. I had to face the footage of my own fall. Aaron had enhanced the chopper's security video, which he found through a proxy request to the manufacturer. It was grainy, but clear enough. Rowan fastened my harness, not properly. Milas was standing behind me, smirking. My scream, my fall, their stillness after. I watched it in silence. Vera sat beside me, holding my hand. I didn't cry. When it ended, I said, "Now we have everything." And we did. My body was rebuilt, my mind was ready. My enemies still lived in a world where I was gone. But I was here, and I was coming. They didn't expect the doors to open. Not that day, not in that place, not at my own memorial, where black suits filled every seat, cameras circled like vultures, and my face, frozen in portrait, stood at the center of their curated grief. I walked in wearing black. The room gasped before it fell into silence, like a spell broke. I took my time down the aisle, cane tapping the floor, coat buttoned high, dark glasses hiding the storm in my eyes. At the podium, Rowan stood mid-sentence. "Celine was still alive," I said. Every head snapped toward me. The microphones caught it all. I took off my glasses. Rowan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Milas, to her credit, blinked once, then twice. Her hand tightened around the stem of her champagne flute. The cameras were rolling. We live-streamed viral before I hit the third row. "I survived," I said, barely. "You two should have double-checked your math." Gasps. Phones are held higher. A reporter near the back whispered, "Is this staged?" I reached the podium and pulled a small remote from my coat. "I'd like to submit a few words of remembrance," I said, "and some evidence." The screen behind me flickered on. First, a video. Milas is on a couch, wine in hand, giggling. "Just one push and we own it all." Laughter. Her voice. "She's not mentally stable anyway. We're doing her a favor." Then Rowan's reply. "We'll file the claim right after. She always took too many risks. Let the paperwork reflect that." The room went dead. Then, financial records, charts and transfers. Shell corporations are traced to accounts in the Caymans. My company's board votes logged and time-stamped, doctored after my death. Finally, the helicopter footage, grainy but clear. Milas's smirk. Rowan is turning away. "She's unstable," Rowan blurted suddenly. "This is edited. She's making this up." I looked at him, then "Sue me." He shut his mouth. The next voice belonged to Vera, stepping forward with a flash drive and a folder. "Certified chain of custody," she said. "Copies distributed to 3 independent newsrooms and 1 federal prosecutor." The crowd surged. Reporters yelled questions. The press surged toward us as security scrambled to hold them back. But the damage was done. Milas's face had gone pale. "You can't prove anything." Aaron appeared from the side entrance. "We don't have to. You did that for us." He held up a laptop linked to the live stream, now spiking with millions of views. Hashtags trended. Journalists in the back updated headlines in real time. Rowan tried to leave. 2 uniformed officers entered the chapel. "Mr. Whitmore," one asked, "you'll need to come with us." Gasps, a scream. Milas turned to run but froze at the second officer's voice. "Ms. Lane, we have questions regarding your role in a life insurance fraud and attempted homicide." They didn't resist. Not publicly. Too many eyes. Too much at stake. I stood in front of the podium as they were led out. Their silence was louder than anything they'd ever said to me. Someone in the audience clapped. Then another. Then the whole room rose. But I didn't smile, not yet. Instead, I leaned into the microphone. They buried me alive. But they forgot. I know how to dig. In the moments that followed, chaos rippled like an earthquake. Board members who once praised Milas now exchanged frantic whispers. A top investor rushed out, phone glued to his ear. At least 2 of the company's PR officers had turned ghost white. The assistant to the governor, who had attended as a close friend of the family, slipped quietly toward the exit. But I stayed rooted. "Some of you knew," I said, voice firm. "Some of you helped bury me. I'm not here to forgive. I'm here to dismantle every lie that let this happen." A woman from the crowd shouted, "Celine, what do you say to claims that you were mentally unfit to lead?" I turned, met her gaze. "They made you believe that because it was convenient. Because powerful women scare people more than dead ones." Another question. "Where have you been all this time?" "Hiding," I said. "Healing, preparing, but not anymore." I raised my voice, letting it carry. "For weeks, I lay in snow, torn and forgotten. For months, they profited from my absence. But I've returned not to reclaim what's mine. I've returned to expose what's theirs." The live chat exploded. Commentators streamed their reactions live. Legal analysts broke down the implications of the evidence. The news cycle reoriented itself instantly around one headline: "The woman who crashed her own funeral." Aaron updated the media with additional encrypted links to the full report. Vera handed out prepared packets to key press members. This wasn't just spectacle. It was a takedown. Rowan's face contorted in disbelief, like he couldn't fathom that the ghost he helped create now stood above him. "You think this will stick?" he spat, voice cracking. "We have lawyers. Reputation burns fast when soaked in gasoline," I replied. He flinched. Milas, meanwhile, looked dazed, like a child caught stealing and realizing the world was watching. Her carefully curated persona cracked. Her fingers trembled. Her voice, always sharp, was suddenly small. "You weren't supposed to survive," she whispered. I stepped closer. And yet, here I am. The officers took them out the side door. Cameras followed. Within the hour, stock prices dipped. By evening, sponsors withdrew. By morning, Rowan and Milas were trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons. I stood outside the chapel as the crowd dispersed, a winter wind cutting through the silence. Vera joined me, her breath fogging the air. "You did it." I looked ahead. "No," I said. "This was just the reveal." She smiled. "So what comes next?" I stared down the lens of a rolling camera, held my head high, and said, "Now, I rebuild, and I do it better without parasites at my back." The funeral they planned was my ending, but I turned it into a beginning. The media frenzy didn't die down for weeks. Within 48 hours, Rowan and Milas became the faces of betrayal in every major outlet. Headlines screamed, "CEO fakes sister's death for profit, murder by marriage. She crashed her own funeral and took them down." Brands that once sponsored our company withdrew. Investors bailed. Stockholders filed lawsuits. Overnight, their empire cracked and then collapsed. Rowan disappeared from the public eye, hiding behind a vague medical leave. But every step he took outside was met with paparazzi. At one point, a video surfaced of him sprinting from reporters, face pale, shouting, "No comment," as coffee was thrown in his direction by a furious ex-employee. Milas didn't fare any better. A former media darling, she now faced full cancellation. Her social media accounts went dark, though not before the internet tore her apart. Old associates distanced themselves. Charity boards removed her name, even tabloids refused to touch her story. Too toxic. She tried to post a tearful video once. It lasted 4 hours before being pulled down after 1.2 million downvotes and a wave of mocking memes. Legally, investigations were still ongoing. The charges weren't official yet, but the tide had turned. Insurance fraud. Conspiracy. Attempted homicide. Their lawyers scrambled, but it was clear. Even if they stayed out of prison, their lives as they knew them were over. Even their inner circles crumbled. Friends they'd toasted with on yachts now ghosted them. Milas's stylist leaked stories of her screaming fits. A private email surfaced in which Rowan begged an old college friend for a consulting job, only to be politely declined and publicly ridiculed when the email was shared on Reddit. Their assets were frozen, properties investigated. A pending federal audit loomed large. I heard whispers that Rowan tried to move funds offshore and got blocked mid-transfer. Milas's name vanished from the fashion brand she'd once championed. One of her luxury cars was found abandoned outside a motel. The company tried to be formal. It flourished. We hosted a press event, modest, intentional, filled with the team members who'd stayed loyal or had been wronged. I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about resilience and rebuilding, and how the strongest structures are forged in fire. Aaron was there, quietly watching from the back. Vera stood beside me, nodding with pride. The applause we received wasn't about scandal, it was about survival. As for me, I no longer needed to prove anything. I didn't stalk their feeds or follow their demise step by step. I didn't need to. The world saw. The world remembered. And they would carry that shame longer than any sentence the court could write. Some people asked why I didn't press harder for jail time. But I knew this. Prison ends. Public disgrace. And I wasn't after blood anymore. I was after peace, and I finally had it. 1 year later, I stood in front of a building that didn't exist 12 months ago. It wasn't glass and steel like the towers I used to dream of. It was warm stone, wide windows, painted in soft greens and golds. The sign out front read, "The Phoenix Center, for Women Who Rise." Inside there were rooms for counseling, classrooms for financial literacy, quiet spaces for women escaping betrayal, manipulation, or silence. We offered shelter, legal aid, and more than anything we offered belief. I didn't run it for show. I was there every week. Sometimes sweeping floors, sometimes holding hands with women who were still shaking from what they left behind. They asked me often, "Did you forgive them?" And my answer never changed. No, but I stopped letting them live in me. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't always the point. Sometimes, choosing life is enough. I still had the limp. Some mornings, it ached. But I wore heels again. I led meetings. I taught seminars titled, "How to Reclaim Your Voice After They Try to Bury It." And I smiled, a lot more than I used to. Aaron moved out west, working with advocacy groups. Vera became a guest lecturer in ethics at a university. We still talked often, laughing, healing, living. I never saw Milas or Rowan again. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear stories, women sharing tales of survival, in whispers, over coffee or under blankets. One would say, "They tried to end me," and another would say, "But you're still here." And that's what mattered. I had lost everything once, my body, my voice, my sense of safety. But I had also rebuilt. Stronger, softer, clearer. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer ruled me. There were hard days, of course, stories that mirrored my own too closely. Women who came in with bruises on their arms and deeper wounds in their voices. One night, a young mother with 2 children slept on the lobby couch because she had nowhere else to go. I sat with her until dawn, holding one of the babies so she could rest. In those moments I understood something deeply. Survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just getting through Tuesday. We had volunteer lawyers who helped women reclaim custody. A small fund helped survivors start new businesses. One opened a bakery, another a yoga studio. We printed their stories and framed them in the hallway under a sign, "Not broken, becoming." The walls were filled with laughter now. Real laughter, the kind that rises after tears. There was art on the ceilings and blankets folded by windows, and a little garden where rosemary and lavender grew wild. And every time I walked through those halls I felt something I never had before. Not triumph, not revenge. Peace. True, quiet, blooming peace. I gave talks when invited, but I didn't speak of Rowan and Milas anymore. not because I forgot, but because they no longer deserved space in my breath. This was no longer their story. It was mine. And it was no longer about what was taken, it was about what I chose to build from the ruins.